The ancient scanning arrays deep within Federation space hummed with purpose as they processed the latest batch of stellar surveys. Across 10,000 star systems, sentient life had been cataloged, measured, and filed into neat categories that determined each species' role in the grand galactic order. The Mindari, with their crystal telepathy, served as communication specialists. The Vorthak manipulated quantum fields and handled advanced engineering. The ethereals phased between dimensions and worked as scouts and infiltrators. Every civilization had found its place in the carefully orchestrated symphony of galactic society. Senior Analyst Cree examined the newest report with growing confusion. The third planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star had produced readings that defied every established pattern. The electromagnetic signatures suggested advanced technology, yet the power levels were primitive by galactic standards. Thermal imaging revealed massive population centers, but the energy distribution was chaotic and inefficient. Most puzzling of all, the communication intercepts showed no signs of the neural harmony that marked every other sapient species. The beings, calling themselves humans, appeared to be trapped in a permanent state of psychological fragmentation. Their radio transmissions revealed not the unified voice of a mature civilization, but thousands of competing signals broadcasting in hundreds of different languages. Wars raged across their continents while simultaneously other regions engaged. In trade and cultural exchange, some humans worshipped multiple gods, others denied divine existence entirely, and many seemed uncertain about fundamental questions that other species had resolved millennia ago. By every established metric, humanity should have destroyed itself long before developing spaceflight. Their homeworld was a nightmare of geological instability, extreme weather patterns, and predatory wildlife that would have challenged even the most resilient Federation species. Yet somehow, these fractured beings had not only survived, but appeared to thrive in conditions that should have been impossible. Federation xenobiologists studied the biological samples retrieved by stealth probes and found even more anomalies. Human genetics showed none of the careful cultivation marks present in every other sapient species. Where other civilizations bore the subtle genetic signatures of ancient guidance and optimization, humans appeared to be the product of pure evolutionary chaos. Their immune systems were grossly over-engineered for their current environment. Their stress responses were calibrated for threats that no longer existed on their world. Their neurochemistry showed adaptations for surviving in small, competing groups rather than the large, cooperative societies that marked true civilization. Most disturbing was their complete lack of psychic potential. Every other known species possessed at least rudimentary telepathic abilities that allowed for the mental unity necessary for galactic citizenship. Humans showed no such capacity, yet somehow maintained complex societies through primitive verbal and written communication. They had developed elaborate technological systems to replace the natural mental connections that other species took for granted. Admiral Thorne received the xenobiological assessment with barely concealed contempt. His subjugation fleet had brought over 800 worlds into the Federation's embrace, each following the same predictable pattern. Initial resistance would crumble. When faced with overwhelming technological superiority, local leaders would recognize the futility of opposition and negotiate terms for their species' integration. Within a generation, new member worlds would be grateful for the peace and prosperity that Federation membership provided. The human assessment suggested they would be even easier than most. Their fragmented political systems meant no unified resistance could be organized. Their primitive weapons posed no threat to Federation shielding technology. Their inability to achieve mental unity would prevent the kind of coordinated defense that occasionally prolonged integration campaigns on more advanced worlds. Thorne's tactical staff prepared the standard demonstration of force. 12 dreadnoughts would position themselves over Earth's major population centers while broadcasting the integration ultimatum. Historical analysis suggested an 87% probability of immediate surrender once the humans witnessed Federation technological capabilities. The remaining 13% typically capitulated within 48 hours of targeted infrastructure destruction. The fleet's approach to the Sol system proceeded without incident. Human detection systems were laughably primitive, providing barely minutes of warning before Federation vessels achieved orbital positions. Thorne settled into his command chair as the communication arrays powered up to deliver the ultimatum that had never failed to produce the desired result. The broadcast began with the standard pattern of demonstrations. Federation energy weapons vaporized several uninhabited asteroids in the outer system, their destruction visible from Earth's surface. Tractor beams relocated one of the planet's smaller moons as a display of casual technological superiority. When Thorne judged that sufficient awe had been generated, he activated the translation matrix and began the integration speech. The response came not from a single source, but from hundreds of different transmissions flooding every communication frequency. Human voices speaking dozens of languages delivered messages that ranged from formal diplomatic protest to individual citizens expressing personal defiance. Some responses contained detailed technical analyses of Federation technology. Others consisted of creative suggestions regarding anatomically impossible activities that Thorne could perform with his ultimatum. Most peculiar of all, many of the responses shared common elements despite originating from completely separate sources. Phrases like "come and take it" and "over my dead body" appeared in transmission after transmission, suggesting some form of distributed cultural programming that allowed coordination without direct mental connection. The humans had somehow achieved synchronized defiance without the psychic unity that made such coordination possible in civilized species. They were acting as individuals while simultaneously displaying species-wide behavioral patterns. The contradiction hurt Thorne's head to contemplate. As the 48-hour deadline approached, Federation sensors detected massive increases in industrial activity across Earth's surface. Rather than preparing surrender negotiations, the humans were mobilizing for war. Military units moved to defensive positions while civilian populations began constructing improvised fortifications. Most disturbing of all, the communication intercepts suggested that many humans were actually excited about the prospect of fighting a technologically superior enemy. Thorne stared at the tactical displays, showing a species that defied every precedent in Federation history. They lacked the unity to be reasoned with, the wisdom to recognize their hopeless position, and apparently the sanity to fear extinction. For the first time in his career, he wondered if the integration protocols would be sufficient. The deadline expired with Earth still broadcasting defiant responses in hundreds of languages. Thorne gave the order to begin orbital bombardment, unaware that he was about to discover why some species evolved in gardens while others learned to survive in the wild. Smoke rose from the crater where the Pentagon had stood just hours before. Federation orbital strikes had eliminated what their intelligence identified as Earth's primary military command centers with surgical precision. Similar scenes played out across the globe as government buildings, military bases, and communication hubs were reduced to radioactive glass. Admiral Thorne waited for the inevitable surrender broadcasts that had followed such demonstrations on 800 previous worlds. Instead, something impossible happened. The attack seemed to make the humans more dangerous rather than less. Military units that should have been paralyzed by the loss of central command began operating with even greater efficiency. Rather than collapse into chaos, human forces started employing tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. They abandoned the concept of front lines entirely, allowing Federation troops to occupy territory only to discover that occupation meant nothing. When every human civilian was a potential combatant, Lieutenant Dex of the Thraxi Dominion's elite assault corps found himself trapped in what humans called Detroit, surrounded by enemies who materialized from seemingly empty buildings. His tactical computer could not identify command structures or predict enemy movements because the humans appeared to have no formal organization at all. Individual fighters made independent decisions that somehow coordinated into larger, strategic patterns without any visible communication. Federation doctrine assumed that Destroying enemy leadership would paralyze resistance. The humans seemed to interpret the destruction of their governments as permission to ignore rules of engagement entirely. Military units that had been constrained by political oversight suddenly began employing weapons and tactics that their own leaders had previously forbidden. In the ruins of Washington, a human sergeant named Tom Wilson led a group of soldiers and armed civilians in a running battle with Federation peacekeepers. His unit had no contact with higher command, no resupply lines, and no strategic objectives beyond making the aliens pay for every meter of ground. When Federation forces deployed their standard crowd control weapons, Wilson's people responded with improvised explosive devices that turned city blocks into death traps, the pattern repeated across every continent. In Moscow, human fighters disappeared into subway tunnels and emerged behind Federation lines. In Beijing, civilian engineers jury-rigged industrial equipment into weapons that had never appeared in any military handbook. In London, retired soldiers taught neighborhood children how to construct booby traps from household chemicals. Most disturbing to Federation commanders was the humans' complete disregard for acceptable casualty ratios, where civilized species would surrender when losses reached 10%. Human units continued fighting at 50% casualties. Some groups fought until literally every member was dead, often taking Federation soldiers with them in final acts of defiance that served no tactical purpose. Dr. Emma Hayes worked frantically in an underground laboratory beneath what had once been Harvard University, analyzing captured Federation technology while explosions shook dust from the ceiling above. Her team of graduate students and professors had been studying alien equipment for weeks, reverse engineering weapons and defensive systems using principles that Federation science had never intended to be discovered by primitive species. The breakthrough came when Hayes realized that Federation technology relied on predictable user behavior patterns. Their weapons were designed for species that followed logical tactical doctrines. Their shields assumed incoming attacks would follow standard military protocols. Their communication systems expected organized command structures with clear hierarchies. Humans did none of these things. They used Federation weapons in ways that their designers had never imagined. They attacked from directions that tactical computers dismissed as impossible. They made command decisions based on intuition and emotion rather than logical analysis, creating behavioral patterns that alien prediction algorithms could not model. In Chicago, a group of humans led by former police officer Maria Rodriguez had turned the city's sewer system into a three-dimensional battlefield. Federation forces controlled the surface while human fighters moved through tunnels, emerging to strike at targets before vanishing back underground. Rodriguez's people had no formal military training, but they understood urban warfare in ways that threatened to drive Federation tactical officers insane. The aliens had expected to fight an army. Instead, they faced an entire species that refused to accept defeat. Every human they killed seemed to inspire 10 more to take up arms. Every victory cost more resources than the original target was worth. Every day brought new innovations as humans found creative ways to turn their primitive technology against Federation equipment. Federation medical facilities began reporting casualties from stress-related disorders as their troops struggled to adapt to an enemy that seemed immune to psychological warfare. Standard Federation doctrine relied on breaking enemy morale through displays of superior firepower. The humans responded to such displays by becoming more creative in their resistance methods. Commander Roy Patterson broadcast from a hidden bunker somewhere in the Rocky Mountains, his transmission reaching human resistance cells across North America. His message was simple but devastating to Federation morale. The aliens were not invincible. Their technology could be defeated. Their troops could be killed. Most importantly, they were not prepared for the kind of war that humans had been perfecting. For millennia, the Federation had spent thousands of years conquering civilized species that fought according to established rules of warfare. They had never encountered a species that treated warfare as an art form rather than a necessary evil. Humans had been fighting each other with increasing sophistication for their entire recorded history, developing tactics and strategies that Assumed opponents would be equally innovative and ruthless. As weeks turned into months, the invasion force that had conquered nearly 1,000 worlds found itself bleeding ships and personnel to defend positions that provided no strategic value. Every human city became a fortress. Every human civilian became a potential threat. Every day of occupation required more resources than the previous day. With no end in sight, Admiral Thorne stared at casualty reports that would have been impossible on any previous campaign. His forces held every major population center on Earth, yet somehow the humans were winning. They were winning through sheer refusal to acknowledge that they had lost. They were winning by treating every setback as an opportunity to become more dangerous. The humans had proven something that contradicted 10,000 years of galactic history. Civilization was not necessarily superior to chaos. Unity was not always stronger than individualism. Sometimes, the species that refused to be chained were the ones that deserved to be free. But Thorne was not ready to accept that lesson. He sent a priority transmission to Federation Command, requesting reinforcements and authorization to use increasingly destructive methods. The humans had shown that they would not surrender. Perhaps it was time to show them that some chains could not be broken through defiance alone. Deep beneath the ruins of Geneva, Dr. Emma Hayes made a discovery that would change everything. Her underground laboratory had become a fortress of knowledge where human scientists worked around the clock to understand their alien enemies, captured. Federation equipment filled every available surface while her team of researchers pushed themselves beyond exhaustion to unlock secrets that might save their species. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While analyzing biological samples taken from dead Federation soldiers, Hayes noticed genetic markers that appeared in every alien species they had encountered. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental and too complex to be natural. Every sapient race in the Federation shared certain DNA sequences that were completely absent in human genetics. Hayes ran the analysis 17 times before accepting the impossible conclusion. The genetic markers were artificial insertions, modifications made by an advanced civilization millions of years ago. Every species in the Federation had been deliberately altered during their evolutionary development. Every species except humanity. The implications were staggering. While the galaxy's civilizations developed under careful guidance from some ancient power, humans had evolved alone on a world that the mysterious precursors had apparently abandoned or forgotten. Earth was not just another planet in the galactic community. It was a laboratory that had been left to run wild while the rest of the galaxy remained under cultivation, the revelation explained. Everything that had puzzled Federation xenobiologists about human behavior. Where other species had been shaped for cooperation and unity, humans had evolved for competition and independence. Where others developed specialized abilities within stable environments, humans became generalists in a world that demanded constant adaptation. The Federation species were domesticated animals. Humanity was still wild. Hayes transmitted her findings to resistance cells across the globe, but the information raised more questions than it answered. If humanity was truly alone in their evolutionary development, what had happened to the precursors, who had shaped every other galactic civilization? Why had Earth been abandoned, while the rest of the galaxy remained under their influence? The answer came from an unexpected source. Commander Ray Thompson's intelligence unit had been monitoring Federation communications for weeks, slowly breaking their encryption codes and intercepting strategic discussions. The breakthrough message revealed the true nature of their situation, and the reason why the Federation was so desperate to control humanity. The galactic government was not just another interstellar empire. It was a management system created by the ancient precursors to maintain order in their absence. Every Federation species had been programmed with psychological limitations that prevented them from challenging the established order or developing technologies that might disrupt galactic stability. They were living in a carefully constructed garden where true growth was impossible. Humanity represented something that should not exist in the precursor's design. a species that had developed advanced technology without built-in psychological controls, a civilization that could innovate and adapt without artificial limitations, the first truly free predator that the galaxy had seen in millions of years. The Federation Council's emergency sessions revealed their growing panic. Earth was not just resisting integration. It was proving that their entire system could be challenged. Human independence was inspiring other species to question authority that they had never thought to doubt. The virus of freedom was spreading through carefully controlled populations that had been designed to remain compliant. In the underground tunnels beneath London, former British Army Colonel James Mitchell coordinated with resistance cells across Europe. His people had captured several Federation officers during recent raids, and their interrogations revealed a terrifying truth. The aliens were genuinely afraid, not just of human military capabilities, but of what humanity represented to their entire way of life. The Federation had spent thousands of years managing a galaxy full of species that accepted their role in the greater order. They had never encountered a civilization that rejected the fundamental premise of that order. Humans were not just fighting for their independence. They were proving that independence was possible. The psychological impact rippled through Federation space as reports of human resistance spread through their communication networks. Species that had never questioned their place in the galactic hierarchy began experiencing thoughts and desires that their genetic programming should have prevented. The mere existence of human defiance was causing cracks in the mental conditioning that held their entire civilization together on a mining world in the Outer Rim. Workers from 3 different Federation species stopped their assigned tasks to discuss the strange reports coming from Earth. For the first time in their recorded history, they began to wonder why they accepted orders without question. The concepts of individual choice and personal freedom were completely alien to their experience. Yet somehow these ideas began to take root in minds that had been designed to reject such thinking. Federation psychologists worked desperately to contain what they termed a contamination of unauthorized thought patterns. Emergency broadcast conditioning attempted to reinforce the mental barriers that kept their populations stable and compliant. But the damage was spreading faster than their ability to control it. Dr. Hayes continued her research as Federation reinforcements poured into the Sol system. The ethereal collective's phase-shifted assassins materialized in human cities only to discover that humans possessed an inexplicable ability to sense their presence. The hive mind's biological warfare specialists found their carefully designed pathogens neutralized by immune systems that had been forged in the chaos of natural evolution. The machine concordat's adaptive AI systems were outmaneuvered by human unpredictability that followed no logical patterns. Each alien species brought their greatest strengths to bear against humanity, only to discover that their specialized abilities were useless against opponents who had evolved to survive anything their world could produce. The humans were not superior in any single area, but they were adaptable in ways that specialized civilizations could not match. The Federation began to realize that they were not fighting another member species that could be integrated into their system. They were fighting something that their entire civilization had been designed to prevent. A species that had evolved without guidance, without limitations, and without the psychological constraints that made galactic order possible. Admiral Thorne received increasingly desperate orders from Federation Command as their carefully maintained galaxy began to destabilize. Human resistance was not just preventing Earth's integration. It was inspiring rebellion across dozens of worlds as species that had never known freedom began to demand it. The humans had become more than just another conquered world refusing to submit. They had become living proof that the Federation's entire way of life was built on lies. The precursors had not created a galactic paradise. They had created a galactic prison, and humanity was the key that could unlock every cage. But the Federation still had one final weapon, something left by the precursors for emergencies exactly like this one. The Harmony engine had been used only twice in galactic history, both times to prevent civilization-ending conflicts. If human independence could not be broken through conventional means perhaps it could be eliminated through methods that reach deeper than technology or warfare. The decision was made in chambers, where no human voice could be heard. If humanity could not be chained, then humanity would be transformed into something that wanted to wear chains. The galaxy's most sacred weapon began its journey toward the Sol system, carrying with it the hopes and fears of 10,000 civilizations that had forgotten what it meant to be free. The wreckage of the Federation destroyer drifted in Earth's orbital shipyard while human engineers swarmed over its hull like antibodies attacking an infection. Tom Bradley supervised the salvage operation from his position aboard the converted space station that had once served as a tourist destination. 6 months of brutal warfare had taught humanity many lessons, but none more valuable than the discovery that alien technology could be understood, modified, and improved upon. The captured vessel represented humanity's first intact Federation starship, seized during a desperate boarding action that had cost 47 human lives. Those deaths had purchased something invaluable, a complete understanding of the technology that had kept Earth imprisoned within its own solar system. Within weeks of the capture, human shipyards began producing vessels that bore only superficial resemblance to their Federation origins, where alien engineers prioritized efficiency and standardization. Human modifications emphasized survival and adaptability. Federation ships relied on centralized computer systems that could be disabled with a single well-placed strike. Human versions featured dozens of backup command stations scattered throughout the vessel, each capable of independent operation. While alien crews followed rigid protocols that assumed everything would function as designed, human crews trained for scenarios where nothing worked as intended. The psychological differences proved even more significant than the technological ones. Federation vessels operated under the assumption that their crews would work in perfect harmony toward common goals. Human ships were designed around the expectation that crew members would disagree, argue, and pursue competing objectives while somehow still accomplishing their mission. Lisa Park commanded the first human fleet to venture beyond the Sol system, leading 12 converted destroyers on a mission that would have been impossible under Federation tactical doctrine. Her target was not enemy warships or strategic installations, but the communication and supply networks that held the galactic government together. While Federation admirals fought for decisive victories that would end conflicts quickly, Park fought to make the war itself unbearable for her enemies. The human strategy defied every principle of civilized warfare. Instead of engaging Federation battle fleets in direct combat, Park ships struck at cargo convoys, communication relays, and infrastructure installations before vanishing into the void before reinforcements could arrive. Each raid was carefully calculated not to achieve military objectives, but to force the Federation to divert resources from the Earth theater to defend targets they had never needed to protect. Federation logistics officers found themselves facing an entirely new category of problem. Their supply lines had been designed to move resources efficiently through space control by cooperative civilizations. They had never been built to withstand systematic attacks by opponents who treated commerce raiding as an art form. Human raiders appeared without warning, destroyed their targets with improvised weapons, and disappeared before defensive forces could respond. The psychological impact proved even more devastating than the material damage. For thousands of years, Federation species had lived in a carefully maintained peace where warfare was rare and brief. The sudden appearance of human raiders in systems that had known only tranquility for generations sent shockwaves through populations that had never experienced fear of external attack. Panic spread through Federation space as reports of human attacks reached worlds that had considered themselves completely secure. Planets that had never needed defensive installations suddenly found themselves building fortifications for the first time in their recorded history. The mere possibility of human raids was enough to destabilize governments and shatter the confidence that held Federation society together. On the industrial world of Kepler-4, workers rioted when news arrived that human raiders had destroyed a supply convoy carrying essential medical supplies. The population had never experienced shortages of any kind, and their genetic conditioning had not prepared them for the stress of scarcity. Local authorities found themselves unable to restore order among people who had been designed to be peaceful and cooperative. Similar scenes played out across dozens of Federation worlds as the reality of war penetrated societies that had been carefully insulated from such concerns. Species that had never known conflict began experiencing emotions and behaviors that their psychological programming should have prevented. Fear, anger, and desperation were foreign concepts to civilizations that had been engineered for contentment and compliance. The Federation Council met in emergency session as reports poured in from across their territory. Human raiders were not just attacking strategic targets. They were systematically destroying the psychological foundations of galactic civilization. Every successful raid proved that the Federation could not protect its own citizens. Every destroyed convoy demonstrated that their technological superiority meant nothing against opponents who refused to fight. According to established rules, Admiral Thorne found himself commanding a war that no longer made strategic sense. His forces controlled Earth's surface and orbital space, yet somehow the humans were winning the larger conflict. Every day brought new reports of Federation worlds demanding increased security, resources that had to be diverted from the Earth theater to defend targets that should not have needed protection. The humans had accomplished something that military theorists had believed impossible. They were simultaneously losing every battle while winning the war. Earth remained under occupation, but the cost of that occupation was bankrupting the Federation's ability to maintain control over the rest of their territory. Dr. Emma Hayes transmitted intelligence reports from her hidden laboratory beneath Geneva, analyzing Federation communications for signs of their enemy's psychological state. Her findings revealed a civilization in crisis. Species that had never questioned authority were beginning to doubt their leaders. Worlds that had accepted Federation protection for millennia were demanding explanations for failures that should not have been possible. Most significantly, human resistance was inspiring other species to reconsider their own positions within the galactic order. On mining worlds and agricultural colonies, workers began asking why they accepted conditions that benefited distant administrators more than themselves. The concepts of individual rights and personal freedom, carried by human raiders and resistance fighters, spread like viruses through populations that had no psychological defenses against such ideas. The Federation faced an impossible choice. They could commit the resources of their entire civilization to crush human resistance, leaving the rest of their territory defenseless against the chaos that human ideas were inspiring. Or they could accept that the war was unwinnable and attempt to negotiate with a species that had proven impossible to defeat through conventional means. Federation Command made the decision that their predecessors had hoped would never be necessary. Deep in the galactic core, ancient systems began powering up for the first time in thousands of years. The Harmony engine represented the precursor's final solution to problems that could not be solved through normal means. It had been used only twice in galactic history, both times to prevent conflicts that threatened to destroy civilization itself. As the massive construct began its journey toward the Sol system, Admiral Thorne received orders that filled him with both hope and dread. The weapon approaching Earth could impose mental unity on entire star systems, forcing compliance through direct manipulation of consciousness itself. It represented the power to end human resistance permanently, but it also represented an admission that the Federation had failed, that their entire way of life could be threatened by a single species that refused to accept the natural order. The Harmony engine was not just a weapon. It was proof that the galactic civilization built by the precursors was more fragile than anyone had ever imagined. The hunter had become the hunted, and the galaxy's most sacred weapon was humanity's final test. The Harmony engine emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system like a monument to the power that had shaped galactic civilization for millions of years. The massive construct dwarfed even the largest Federation dreadnoughts, its crystalline core pulsing with energies that existed at the intersection of technology and consciousness itself. Admiral Thorne watched its approach with a mixture of relief and unease. Knowing that this ancient weapon represented both salvation and surrender. Dr. Emma Hayes detected the artifact's arrival from her hidden laboratory beneath the ruins of Geneva. Her instruments screamed warnings as exotic particles flooded the electromagnetic spectrum, carrying with them the psychic resonance of every Federation species contributing to the weapon's activation. For the first time since the war began, Hayes felt genuine fear. The readings suggested energies that could reshape consciousness itself across an entire star system. Human resistance leaders received the warning through their scattered communication networks, but found themselves facing an enemy that could not be fought with conventional weapons. The Harmony engine required no vulnerable supply lines to attack, no crew quarters to infiltrate, no weak points that human ingenuity could exploit. It was a direct assault on the foundations of human individuality itself, Tom Bradley coordinated Earth's final preparations from his command center aboard the Orbital Defense Station. His tactical displays showed Federation fleets moving into position around the ancient weapon while human forces prepared for what everyone understood would be their last battle. The aliens had finally deployed something that human adaptability could not overcome. The activation sequence began with a harmony that touched every Federation mind simultaneously. Across the galaxy, billions of alien consciousness joined their psychic energy to power the device that would impose unity on the chaotic species that threatened their way of life. The ethereals phased into mental alignment, the Mindari opened their crystal networks, and the hive minds merged their collective awareness into a single purpose on Earth. 7 billion humans felt the approaching wave of artificial peace. Children stopped playing in bomb shelters and turned their faces toward the sky. Soldiers laid down their weapons and waited for the end of conflict. Scientists and philosophers experienced a brief moment of perfect clarity before the imposed harmony swept away their individual thoughts and replaced them with collective serenity. The effect lasted exactly 37 seconds. Human consciousness, forged in millions of years of evolutionary pressure to survive as individuals in hostile environments, began to reject the artificial unity with a violence that surprised even the humans experiencing it. One by one, then in groups, then in massive waves, human minds tore free from the imposed harmony with a psychological effort that left many temporarily unconscious but fundamentally unchanged. The rejection was not painless. Humans screamed as their consciousness fought against patterns designed to replace individual thought with collective peace. Blood vessels burst in eyes and noses as brains struggled against neurochemical changes that should have been permanent. But the human mind had been shaped by an evolutionary process that demanded survival at any cost. And the cost of unity was the death of everything that made humanity human. The feedback began as a whisper of wrongness in the harmony engines. Perfect resonance. The device had been designed to work with minds that accepted unity as a natural state, consciousness that welcomed the dissolution of individual identity into larger patterns of thought. It had never encountered minds that actively fought against such integration with every fiber of their being. 7 billion human consciousness rejecting imposed harmony created a psychic backlash that traveled through the quantum entanglement, connecting the harmony engine to every Federation species powering it. The shock wave struck alien minds that had no defense against the pure, concentrated essence of individual will refusing to be suppressed. Across Federation space, the mental controls that had kept their civilizations stable for thousands of years began to collapse under the strain. Species that had forgotten how to disagree suddenly rediscovered independent thought as their genetic conditioning failed under the psychic assault of human rejection. Governments built on assumed compliance found themselves facing populations that were learning to question authority for the first time in their recorded history. On the industrial world of Vega Prime, workers abandoned their assigned tasks as concepts of personal choice flooded minds that had been designed for contentment with predetermined roles. The local administrators found themselves unable to restore order among people who were suddenly experiencing desires and ambitions that their species had not felt for millennia. The ethereal collective fractured into thousands of individual consciousness. As their psychic unity shattered under the feedback from the harmony engine, For the first time in their history, ethereal individuals found themselves truly alone in their own minds, experiencing the terror and exhilaration of personal identity without the comfort of collective thought. The Mindari crystal networks began resonating with chaotic frequencies as their telepathic connections carried the virus of individualism from mind to mind. Species that had shared thoughts for millions of years suddenly discovered the concept of private mental space, ideas that belong to single individuals rather than the collective whole. General Amy Clark stood on the observation deck of the first human dreadnought to be completed after the Harmony engine's failure, watching as Federation fleets across the solar system began to fragment. Ships were refusing orders as their crews experienced independent thought for the first time. Some vessels opened fire on their own command structures, while others simply powered down their weapons and waited to see what freedom might mean. The Federation Council chamber erupted in chaos as species that had worked together in perfect harmony for thousands of years suddenly found themselves in disagreement about fundamental questions they had never thought to debate. Representatives who had never experienced personal ambition began demanding explanations for decisions they had previously accepted without question. Ambassador Vell of the Centauri Assembly transmitted the message that would end the war, though his voice shook with emotions that his species had been designed never to feel. The formal surrender offered by the Federation Council came not from military defeat, but from the recognition that their entire way of life had been built on a foundation that human existence had proven to be false. The terms were unprecedented. In galactic history, the Federation would dissolve itself as a governing body and reform as a voluntary association of independent worlds. Species that wished to maintain their traditional unity could do so, while those that chose to explore individual freedom would be supported in their transition. Most importantly, humanity would share the knowledge and perspective that came from evolving without artificial constraints. Dr. Hayes emerged from her underground laboratory to find a world transformed. The Federation occupation forces were laying down their weapons not in defeat but in wonder at the possibilities that individual consciousness offered. Alien soldiers who had never made personal choices were experiencing the terrifying joy of deciding their own fates. The chains that had bound the galaxy for millions of years had not been broken by superior weapons or tactical brilliance. They had been shattered by the simple refusal of one species to accept that freedom was impossible. Humanity had not conquered their enemies through force. They had liberated them through example. Earth's skies cleared of alien warships as Federation fleets departed for homeworlds that were discovering independence for the first time. The species that had come to chain humanity found themselves on their knees not in surrender, but in gratitude for the gift of consciousness that they had never known they were missing. The age of imposed harmony was ending, the age of chosen cooperation was about to begin, and in the depths of space the Harmony engine drifted silent and powerless, its purpose fulfilled in ways its creators had never intended. Humanity had taught the galaxy that some chains could only be broken from within, and that the greatest victory was not the defeat of enemies, but their transformation into friends who chose to kneel in recognition of a truth they had never been allowed to discover. The predator from the abandoned world had not devoured its prey. It had set them free to hunt their own destinies among the stars.